Checking out the Cutex 550 watt servo motor. This one is branded an Eagle. Now I've had several of this brand motor before and they're very good servo motors. I'll start by talking about the variable speed system on this one and how you get to easily control that. Next we'll talk about a couple special features on the back of the motor, and then we'll finish up by looking at one modification that I typically do on the pulley of this motor if I want to use the machine for leather work. So if you're used to a noisy clutch motor that's constantly humming and just is very tough to control the speed on, you'll really appreciate a servo motor. This one is what I call a more basic analog servo. There's no digital controller, there's no series of cryptic buttons that you have to learn or memorize. This just has a single knob. So I'm typically setting that between 12 and 1500 RPM for the work that I do, but you can set it anywhere you want and that just controls the maximum speed and power that goes to the motor. Now realize wherever you set that speed knob, you'll also have real-time variable speed from the foot pedal, so that's a huge advantage and something I really consider mandatory for good control at the sewing machine. And if you've ever had a clutch motor take off on you, that's something you'll really appreciate.
Whoa, baby.
And with the kit, you'll get the 3 carriage bolts for mounting up the motor, as well as these rubber vibration dampeners that mount between the motor and the table, extra cork brake, various hardware bits, and then some extra brushes for the motor. And you know, with all the servos I've ever had, I've actually never had to replace the brushes on one of these, so they're very long lasting. I just quickly wanted to show how these vibration dampeners work. They install so that the little flange or extension on that points downward, and they'll go on in this order. So the carriage bolt goes through the table, the rubber washer will be between the table and the motor, and then you'll have a standard washer, lock washer, and nut. And then wrapping out the kit is a belt guard for the servo, as well as an adjustable treadle rod to help hook it up to your machine. So you turn the machine on with a simple switch that you can mount in a convenient location on your table. And let's look at those couple special features on the back. One of them actually relates to the switch. It's power here. There's a 110 volt outlet for your sewing lamp. And what I love about that is you flip on the switch for the motor and the light comes on automatically. So it's quite convenient that way. And the other feature to be aware of is a rotational switch here. So if your machine was sewing normally before a motor swap and you put on this motor and it won't form stitches but it's turning, it just may be that you have that switch the opposite direction. Of course, most industrial sewing machines, the hand wheel needs to turn towards you and it won't form a stitch otherwise. The reason that's reversible is some machines like a leather skiver actually spin the opposite direction. And finally, my favorite modification for this motor is to swap the 75mm stock motor pulley for a much smaller 45mm pulley. It's just a 3/8 inch V-belt type of pulley that you need with a 15mm bore on that. So these are widely available, and by swapping that out, you'll actually slow the motor down a little bit further and increase that punching power if you're working with leather. And the easiest way I've found to do that is just use an impact driver. And you can easily spin off that hardware to replace the pulley. There's just a little woodruff key in there to keep track of, and you'll use that on the replacement pulley as well. Reinstall the star washer, split ring washer, and nut. And when you tighten that up, only use enough force just to flatten out the split ring washer, no more. Just like that. And that little upgrade is great to do on this style of servo motor. So 550 watt max output, which is about 3/4 of a horsepower. 110 volt is what it runs on, and the speed range is 0 to 3450 RPM. On that dial, you may notice that if you crank it up to maximum speed, it may sew at times a little faster than you like. So if you dial that down somewhere between 12 and 1500, usually that's pretty good for most people and it still has plenty of power. Now on the other end of the spectrum, if you drop it all the way down, you may find that while it does sew very slowly, it might not have the punching power you need for thick projects. The mounting bracket does pivot some to allow you to tension the belt when you're done installing it. And as far as typical belt length on this, it's nice to measure exactly what you need for your machine, but I would say that installing this on most single needle walking foot machines, I've used a 39 inch by 3/8 inch V-belt. So even if this is your first time installing a servo motor, you won't have any trouble whatsoever with installation. Really, it's just 3 carriage bolts and a little bit of wire management. The result is a machine that'll sew nice and slowly when you want it to, yet it'll hum along for winding bobbins or just standard projects as well. In the future, you can always add that small motor pulley or even a speed reducer if that's required for your work, but honestly, most people that add this servo motor are really happy with it right out of the box. So if you've got an old-fashioned clutch motor and you're really looking for a big upgrade, I would definitely recommend this Cutex servo motor. Again, this one's branded Eagle, but you get 550 watts and that all-important variable speed. So from personal experience, I would definitely recommend this servo.